These are 6 celebrities you'd never expect to be serious vintage watch collectors, yet every one of them owns pieces that auction houses and experts take completely seriously. A pop musician, a talk show host, a sitcom comedian, a rock guitarist, a fashion designer, and a comedian actor walk into this video, none of them fitting the picture of a hardcore collector, and that mismatch is exactly why their collections are worth a close look. We'll open with the one name watch people already respect, and yes, it belongs to a pop musician, John Mayer. Mayer isn't some rich guy stacking up expensive watches, because he's a genuine tastemaker who writes for Hodinkee and has sat on the jury of the Grand Prix d'Horlogerie de Genève, an award show sometimes called the Oscars of watchmaking. Back in 2013, he anchored the very first episode of Hodinkee's Talking Watches series, and that single episode has drawn roughly 1.7 million views. His vintage side runs deep, spanning several Rolex Daytona reference 6263 watches, a rare Tiffany-stamped yellow gold example among them, plus a Submariner Milsub 5517 and a pair of COMEX Submariners. The whole collection lives in bank vaults, and he's pegged its worth in the tens of millions. Here's the story collectors love. In 2007, Mayer publicly vouched for the authenticity of a controversial Paul Newman Daytona dial, and that dial type picked up the nickname the Mayer dial. Christie's later sold a 6263 Paul Newman carrying a Mayer dial for 461,000 Swiss francs in 2014. In a nice bit of honesty, even Mayer gets corrected, since a vintage Rolex specialist once challenged a claim he made on camera about one of his COMEX Submariners, which goes to show nobody's above a fact check. From a musician, we jump to someone even harder to picture with a loupe in hand, Ellen DeGeneres. The talk show host quietly assembled a collection that watch media says rivals John Mayer's own, and the roster explains why. We're looking at a Rolex Paul Newman Daytona, reference 6241, a 6263 Big Red, the extremely rare 6264 John Player Special in yellow gold, a gold 1978 Submariner, and a late 1970s Patek Philippe Nautilus. Around $750,000 is what a single 1960s gold Rolex Daytona cost her in 2019. One small detail ties this whole video together, because that Paul Newman Daytona sits right there on her wrist during her appearance on Jerry Seinfeld's show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. Seinfeld himself is where we head next. Publicly, he reads as a Breitling loyalist, yet underneath that reputation sits a serious vintage collector, and his crown jewel comes with a real story. Picture a 1968 Rolex Daytona, reference 6239, that was handed to racing driver Vic Elford after he won the 24 Hours of Daytona, which happened to be Porsche's first 24-hour victory. Seinfeld actually waved it off twice, once at $15,000 to $20,000 and again at $50,000, even after he'd already bought Elford's winning Porsche. A friend finally talked him into it. Because the watch carried replacement parts, Hodinkee's Ben Clymer stepped in to restore it with period-correct components, and these days, people simply call it the Jerry Seinfeld Daytona. The biggest number in this whole video belongs to our fourth collector. Eric Clapton, the rock guitarist, ranks among the most important watch collectors who has ever lived, and his ownership alone lifts the value of a watch. In November 2012, his platinum Patek Philippe reference 2499 crossed the block at Christie's in Geneva for $3,635,808. Put that in context, because it was one of only 2 ever cased in platinum, and the second one lives in the Patek Philippe Museum. That sale wasn't a fluke, since a separate Clapton Patek changed hands for $711,000 in 2019, and a rare Rolex Daytona 263 he once owned has gone to auction as well. Our fifth name proves this story reaches past musicians and comedians. Ralph Lauren, the fashion designer, collects vintage with museum-grade taste, and one piece stands above the rest. He owns the Cartier Tank Century that once belonged to Andy Warhol, won at the auction of Warhol's own watches. His personal leanings run toward vintage Patek Philippe and Cartier, and that's worth separating from his watch brand, because almost everything you'll turn up searching his name online is product rather than his private collection. The most relatable story of the group closes us out. Aziz Ansari, the comedian and actor, turned out to be a genuine vintage Rolex collector, and he laid it all out on Hodinkee's Talking Watches in January 2018 with a vintage Rolex Explorer reference 1016, a day date wearing an onyx dial, and a pre-Daytona 6234. Where he started is what makes him easy to root for. In his own words, "I remember when I was young, I had those Timex Iron Man watches. I always had the Indiglos, and I wore those when I was a kid." Step back, and these six tell one story. A musician, a talk show host, a comedian, a guitarist, a designer, and an actor. Not one of them the collector you'd picture. And yet between them, they hold some of the most important vintage Rolexes and Pateks on the planet. If you're getting into vintage watches, the takeaway is simple, because real passion for these pieces surfaces in the most unexpected places, and the wrist you'd least suspect might be wearing the exact watch you'd most want to own.